Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Animaction. Welcome to the second episode of my Dr.Animaction and Friends, where I bring you a set of 4 top 5 lists on various topics for you to compare. Just like the Christmas episode, I am doing this one unscripted as well, so buckle in. Also like that episode, the 4 lists in question are one from me and one from each of my 3 Discord mods. Mine, 10, and Slinky. And this time I have 2 honorable mention top 5 lists from not quite have their own avatar yet contributors, Rel and Twist. So we're going to go through these lists. I'll give you a little bit of background that they provided me on why they chose who they chose, in which position, and then I'll tell you all why they should really belong there. Just kidding, guys. I respect your choices. So don't forget to chime in with your top 5 Cobras in the comments, and I'll collect whatever lists you send in and do kind of a summary on them at some point. Without further ado, though, let's get on with the top 5s. Alright, we're going to start with mine today, which means that our first number 5 character is Destro's General Voltar. You all may remember Voltar. He was the leader of the Iron Grenadiers, and he wore a purple costume. Came with a vulture. You know, that guy. Mine likes him pretty much for those reasons, because he's an Iron Grenadier, and he has a unique design. I'm not personally a huge fan of this character, and I think he looks like a Star Trek character from the Mirror Dimension, but to each their own. I also don't know why the weapon his action figure came with had a fish fin on the back, but I digress. Oh, and he's also one of the characters that Cobra Commander buried in the freighter during the Cobra Civil War, so he didn't survive the original comic run. Next, we'll move on to Slinky, whose number 5 character is Globulus, the leader of Cobra Law from G.I. Joe the movie. The reason Slinky chose him as number 5 is because he likes the character design, the half-man, half-serpent type thing. He's a fan of what he did to Cobra Commander in the movie, because that was one of the coolest scenes. And he likes that he's voiced by Burgess Meredith. I personally don't like much of anything about Globulus, because I think the entire Cobra Law thing was a mistake. I just assumed that G.I. Joe the movie had kept its fantasy sci-fi out of my military, well, I guess kind of sci-fi, but you all know what I mean. So moving on to 10's number 5 character, we have the red-clad Rattler pilot, Wild Weasel. The only reason 10 gave me for choosing him as his number 5 is because he famously fought in the Bus Wars, which, for all of us G.I. Joe superfans, is referencing a typo on his original file card, which should have said Bush Wars. Personally, I like Wild Weasel a lot also, mostly, because he's a pilot. I like things that fly. But that's generally the only reason. He didn't have much of a character. His design's cool, though, so yeah, I like him. He was a good pick for 5, I think. My pick for 5, however, is the version 1 of the Snow Serpent. I've always been partial to the Arctic characters, and the Snow Serpent was just really cool looking. He had a lot of cool accessories with his toy, and the overall design was just perfectly done for a snow-operating winter soldier. Oh, not, this winter soldier. I thought he was just a really well-made figure and a great foil for Snowjob and Iceberg. For our honorable mentions for number 5, Twist has gone with Destro, and Rel has gone with Dr. Mindbender. Moving on to number 4, let's start with Slinky. Slinky's pick is one of the odd characters in the G.I. Joe toy line, but it's Crystal Ball, the Cobra Hypnotist. Slinky likes him because he's an underdog, one of the most disliked characters out there, and that he's Cobra's PsyOps specialist. Slinky himself is something of a PsyOps specialist as well, so that fits. Slinky also likes that he may have mystical powers. Like I said, keep the fantasy out of my G.I. Joe. It's fine with this character, I guess, because we all know he's a charlatan, but still. This is another one that I kind of thought was half and half. The idea was kind of cool. The look, I thought he belonged on the Dreadnoks. I wish there was a little more to him. 10's number 4 does in fact have a little more to him, however, because it's Storm Shadow, Cobra's resident Arashikage ninja. 10 likes the character's duplicity, being that he's sometimes good, sometimes evil, and nobody can really tell for sure when that's going to change. I personally love Storm Shadow as well, and think that he was a great entry point for ninjas into the G.I. Joe mythology. I'm not sure Larry Hama knew how big that was going to get when he first introduced him. But speaking of Larry Hama, I also think it's awesome that Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are probably the two most fleshed out characters in all of G.I. Joe. So great pick for number 4. My number 4 is the Cobra Techno Viper. I really like this guy because he is a battlefield mechanic, and when I was in the military, in aviation, I was part of the downed aircraft recovery team, which were basically battlefield mechanics. We were the ones who would have to go out and get helicopters that broke down, were shot down, whatever. So that's why I like him now. When I was a kid, I liked him because he had awesome equipment. That backpack with the multiple removable tools and the plasma cutter weapon, and purple's cool. I've always liked purple. He was a cool design to me, and one that's always stuck with me. So that's why I picked him for number 4. Mine's number 4 is a different kind of Viper from around the same release time, the Toxo Viper version 1, or as they're affectionately known on their file card, the Leaky Suit Brigade. Mine likes this character because the design is like nothing we've seen before. It was cool in figure form how it had that locking helmet that would snap onto the figure, and the mythology that was developed by its file card made them pretty interesting characters, knowing that most of them were there because they screwed up in some other capacity. I also like this character, and he kind of almost made my list as well. But he couldn't quite edge out any of my other top 5, and even if he did, I didn't want to duplicate too much on my end. Cool character, cool design, good choice. Our honorable mentions for number 4 are a little bit strange in one side, even more strange than Crystal Ball, because Twist went with Rowdy Roddy Piper. Odd deep cut choice for number 4, but yeah, let's go with it. And Rel went with Zorana, who we'll probably hear more about later as well. Looking at our first number 3, we'll go to 10 for this one, who picked another Arashikage ninja, kind of. Well, he picked the Faceless Master. That is to say, Firefly, the Cobra Saboteur. 10 likes that this guy is just the consummate professional, always on the job, never letting anything distract him, except maybe a larger paycheck. And 10 personally thinks that this guy would have been a better foil for Snake Eyes than Storm Shadow, because in the comics, Firefly is a Koga ninja, and they should be the ones clashing with the Arashikage. I like Firefly because he's got a cool gray and black camo pattern. Well, that, and he's got some cool equipment and a pretty decent backstory. I've always liked sneaky characters, and Firefly is one of the best. But my third choice is a member of the Iron Grenadiers as well. For my taste, though, I went with Targat, the Iron Grenadiers Orbital Drop Troopers. This was just a cool concept I've always been a fan of. The idea that you can drop somebody from space and let them enter a combat situation like a meteor. The Targets had a little easier, since they wore jetpacks, but it was still something that was clearly described on the file cards as kind of a rough job. But this is a cool idea that I've liked in pretty much every application, all the way from the original Starship Troopers novel up to the ODSTs in Halo, and seeing it in G.I. Joe was pretty awesome. And for mine's number 3 pick, we have a Rock Viper. Mine used to be a bit of a climber, and the Rock Viper is a good representation of that. That's the extent of why the character ended up in this position, just that personal connection. I think the Rock Viper is a pretty good choice as well because he just looks cool. I mean, the helmet and its kind of diamond shape doesn't look that cool, and I could do without the porn stash, but the camo pattern was nifty, and he had some cool equipment with the original figure, with that grappling hook and spool of wire on his back. Not sure why he carried such a big gun, though. Oh well. And finally, 10's number 3 goes to Zorana. 10 likes that this character is an awesome actress and just as good a master of disguise as her brother Zartan. She's twin to the really cool character Xandar, which is a bonus, and she takes nothing from the Dreadnoks, eventually rising all the way up to the second in command of the entire Cobra organization in the comics. Just an all-around cool character. And then for our honorable mentions, Twist gives us Zartan, and Rel gives us Storm Shadow. So moving along to myself, for our first number 2 pick, I went with the Eel, the original Cobra Frogman. I love divers, and I love water characters, and the Eel was just such a great design that I can't help but love this character. Putting them up against Wetsuit and Torpedo was always a great time as part of a setting up a nice head-to-head confrontation between my action figures, and this character had pretty much nothing about them that I didn't like. All around, great design. Well, we've had Zorana, but mine went with Xandar for number 2. Mine finds the idea of being able to all but disappear and blend into your background to be really appealing, and Xandar is the expert at this from the G.I. Joe mythology. Personally, I think people like this character because of the totally 80s belly shirt, but that's just me. I do think his design is a little more neon than I would like, and that he didn't necessarily fit in with the rest of the Dreadnoks, but he matched his sister and that was good enough. For our next number 2, Slinky went with Dr. Mindbender, Cobra's resident mad scientist, angry orthodontist. Slinky likes that this guy's a rogue genius. He created Serpentor.
It was I who created you, Serpentor.
No! Serpentor is the product of my genetic engineering!
He created various other things, all for Cobra to go wreak havoc with. He was also into self-experimentation and modification, which is kind of weird. This character was one that never really appealed to me. I'm not big into monocles and capes, and they just kind of make this guy look like a bad cosplayer from the Universal Monsters, which is ironic because he made Frankenstein, or Serpentor as it were.
No! Serpentor is the product of my genetic engineering!
Lastly, for our number 2s, 10 went with Zorana, which, refer to my previous entry on Zorana. All those same things apply here. Although 10 also adds that her duplicitous nature is another cool thing about the character, especially where she fell for Mainframe and they kind of had that romance going for a little while. It kind of softened her character up and made her more amenable to the Joes. Plus, she's a pretty awesome melee fighter, able to go toe-to-toe with someone like Lady J. For our 2 honorable mention characters, Twist went with a bit of a cheat and chose Tomax and Xamot, because, they kind of come as a package deal.
You can't have one without the other.
And Rel went with Destro. And that brings us to our number 1s. We're starting off the 1s with probably one of the oddest characters to ever be put into the G.I. Joe series, and that is mine's pick, Raptor, the Cobra accountant who dresses like a bird and sits in a giant cage. And why, you ask, would anyone pick Raptor as their number 1? Well, if the person in question is a huge fan of the Qatar Hall version of Hawkman in the DC comics, it's a logical choice, I guess. For anyone else, I guess you'd just really, really like birds. But on to Slinky, who decided to go with Baroness. The reason Slinky chose Baroness? Because she is the epitome of a femme fatale character. That black leather, the accent, the disguise and sabotage. Plus, she has an interesting relationship with Destro that's kind of multifaceted and adds an interesting aspect to her character. I have really nothing to add to that, because I agree that of the Cobra High Command, Baroness is probably one of the best. So let's move on to 10, who chose as number 1 also the Baroness. 10 adds to what Slinky said by saying that not only is she those things, but also she has no problem playing all of her foes and her friends against each other. She's a master manipulator, and she's able to turn pretty much any situation to her advantage. Plus, in the 2-part Sunbow episode, Worlds Without End, it added an extra layer to her that was really, really interesting. And for my number 1, I went with my favorite of all the Cobra troop builders, the Alley Viper. Look, I know he's bright orange and that he's got purple camouflage, but none of that takes away from the fact that this character is just awesome. He's got a cool design with that faceplate, came with some awesome accessories like that shield and the grappling gun on his backpack. The way their file card described him as being nearly indestructible and unstoppable with the thick body armor that they wear. Everything about the character is just really cool, except maybe the color scheme. Yes, I'll grant you that. But even that's not enough to detract from its awesomeness, in my opinion. Yeah, I know, I didn't put any Cobra named characters on my top 5, and, I kind of stick with that. Sorry. No, I'm not sorry. And then for our honorable mentions, both Twist and Rel went with Baroness as well. So that's 4 out of 6 going with Baroness for number 1. I'm sure there are no other reasons than what I gave here. And that's it. Essentially, a top 30 Cobras. Well, top 30 minus however many repeats we had. but a nice selection of different choices from a couple of different perspectives. I'm curious what all of you have for your top 5 Cobras, and can't wait to see those lists in the comments. Don't forget to check out all the things and the links in the video description, and come back Friday for the next Dr. Animaction Live, because, like I said, I'm going to try to make that a bi-weekly thing, and that would be this week. That's it for now, though, so thanks everyone for watching. Stay tuned, and stay tuned, as in cartoons. Later.